Thank you all for being a part of today's session. I'm so thrilled to see so many of your faces, so many of your names. I know some of you from previous work experience, some of you are my clients, some of you are colleagues and friends, chief diversity officers, those in HR, and I even got some of my friends in the medical health profession as well too. So thank you all for being here. Really thrilled to be hosting this particular session as a part two. If you might remember, a couple of weeks ago, we had a session where we were celebrating and recognizing the fact that if you can, everyone, please mute. Thank you so much. As you're coming in, we're going to ask everybody to mute. Thank you. And so one of the things that we've been doing as we recognize Mental Health Awareness Month is just bringing the conversation to the forefront. I'm really thrilled, and I'll tell you this, over the last year or two, since the pandemic, where there's been an exacerbated amount of mental health issues and health inequities, and certainly as we've been talking more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, this conversation has come front and center with so many organizations that I work for who have not in the past been willing to have the conversation, been uncomfortable, felt like they were unprepared, didn't feel like this was something they had permission to do. So I am thrilled to see many more leaning in to have the conversation. I think it's important, it's critical. All of us have a role to play in helping to manage not only our own mental health and well-being, but we all have a role to play in ensuring that we are being accepting, accommodating, and that we're not labeling people who are suffering from mental illnesses. So we're going to talk about this in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, acceptance, and all of the other things around respect in the workplace. And I couldn't be more thrilled and honored today than to have not only a colleague and a clinical licensed psychology professional in mental health and mental illness, but also a friend. And so I am going to read for you a bit about her bio so that you know it's not only my friend, but I am so thrilled that I have friends that are highly qualified to do what they do. And I'm thrilled to bring her to you today. Dr. Keturah Jenkins Hall. She was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida, and she's the first African-American female to receive her PhD in clinical and community psychology from the University of South Florida. As a matter of fact, she began what became a 30-year career as a professor of psychology at USF, and she just retired just a few years ago. During her extensive career at USF as a professor and community consultant, she designed courses and conducted numerous workshops nationally and locally addressing cultural diversity in psychology, gender-based treatment protocols for trauma and addictions, and lectures on the destigmatization of mental health in BIPOC communities. Upon retiring in 2016 from USF, she joined the board of trustees of the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg, which is right here in the Tampa Bay area, of which she's now the current board chair. She pursues the mission of race and health equity for the improved health of Pinellas County. She's also co-founder of Mask Up St. Pete and volunteers extensively with the CEGTBA, which is what I was just sharing with you. Also, she has worked a lot to reduce the prevalence of COVID-19 in the African-American community. And beginning in the fall of last year, in 2021, she accepted a position as the visiting professor at Eckerd College. And she teaches a course on health equity and social justice. She's also the CEO of the Greater Reach Alliance of Counselors and Educators, where she provides education, training, and consultation and counseling services to communities who are less likely to seek professional help and professional services. And in 2020, she served as the clinical director of a CARES Act grant to address behavioral health. In addition to all of that, not only is she a professor, a psychologist, an equity leader, and the CEO of her own nonprofit organization, she also serves as an associate pastor at New Dawn Restoration Center in Tampa, Florida, where she is senior pastor in developing leaders, strategic planning, managing resources, and executing the vision and the mission of the church. She is a mentor to many. I've looked up to her for a number of years as an amazing leader. She's a phenomenal consultant, and I'm thrilled to have her here today to share her knowledge, her expertise, her guidance. And I hope all of you will find, and I know you will find this useful, time well spent, and hopefully some actions that you can take back to your organizations and into your firms and really make a difference. So Dr. Hall, we are so thrilled to have you. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley Davis. What an honor it is to be here with you this afternoon to shed some light on the topic of mental illness.
Yeah.
And just being emotionally overloaded and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Look so forward to thank you for that introduction. And of course, nobody likes to hear their own bio. Halfway in it, I said, I just hope she stops soon.
No, I want people to know, this work that we're in, you can't just read a book, you can't just read a survey and a research study and then put your shingle out there and call yourself a licensed clinical psychologist. You can't put yourself out there and call yourself a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. You've got to have some experience, you've got to have background, you've got to have the know-how in all of this. So thank you for being here. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to ask questions and we're just going to have a conversation back and forth. I want you to use the chat box. You can say amen. You can ask questions. You can share, any responses or reactions that you're having. She may ask some questions. You can put them in the chat box as well. And we're going to do that. I see people still joining. Hey, Tony, good to see all of you as well. And as you're coming in, we're going to automatically mute your video so that we can really focus and pinpoint in on Dr. Hall. So the first question, Dr. Hall, I want to just let's start it out by giving a little context. If you can talk a bit about the current state of mental illness today, and just talk a little bit about, is it worse than ever before, or where is it at now? What are you seeing?
That's an excellent question. We have seen an uptick in the number of referrals for mental illness, particularly since the COVID-19 pandemic became a thing in the United States. And the kinds of things that we're seeing is an increase in anxiety, an increase in depression, increase in people asking for help in that area. Also an increase of people who actually, when given tests, score in the moderate to severe range of scores that indicate someone is actually clinically depressed or anxious. We're seeing an uptick in suicide, suicidal ideation, which is just the thoughts about suicide, sometimes the plan about suicide, and also successful suicides. And we're seeing this across age groups. So we're seeing it in children, we're seeing it in adolescents. We're seeing young people come forward with just saying, I think I have an anxiety disorder, or they're self-diagnosing and asking to be brought to therapy. We're seeing parents who, for the first time, have paid attention to their child's budding mental illness and decided to seek professional help. We're seeing LGBTQ plus issues and more suicidality among that population. Wow. And these rates are different depending on the culture, depending on the place in the country, depending on social determinants of health, or other risk factors that may produce stress that would exacerbate pre-existing conditions. And I'm going to try to not say words like exacerbate and words like that, but you know me, that's kind of how I communicate.
In the most practical sense. Thank you for that, because a lot of these terms you may be using, I may exercise my right to come back and say, okay, explain what that means. Here's the other thing too. We utilize mental health and mental illness a lot of times simultaneously. We use those words synonymously, and I know they're not the same. So I'd love for you to share with us a bit about the distinction between the two.
Okay, so first, I'd like to just share my philosophy. So I believe that we are spirit, we live in a body, and we have a soul. And the soul consists of our mind, our will, and our emotions. And our mental health is really soul care. When we care for the soul, we're actually caring and producing good mental health. So mental health includes our emotions, our psychological well-being, our social well-being. It affects how we act and think and feel. And it essentially is your ability to make friends and connections. Your ability to work well and achieve well, your ability to love others and to make meaning in life. And so those are things that are dealing with mental health. Mental illness is the absence of those things, okay?
Wow.
So you're not able to connect with people, you're not able to work well, you're not able to love well, you're not able to find the right kind of meaning in life. So it's the absence of those things that we would consider health.
Oh, that's good. I had never heard it that way. I like that. Is that mental health is something all of us have to be aware of. All of us have to take care of ourselves. And the absence of those things can then result in having a mental illness. That's really good. Can you talk then a bit about what are some of the signs and the symptoms of mental illness? Yes, those things might not be there. I can remember times when I've been extremely stressed. I've not been able to concentrate. I've not been able to eat. I've had, all kinds of anxiety attacks and feeling like I was desperate and hopeless and helpless. Was I on the verge of having a mental illness?
That's a good question, because some of these symptoms are things that all of us experience from time to time. And the word persistent is important when you're thinking about mental illness. So a persistent, you tried things that you want to do to try to eliminate it and they're not working and it's over a period of time. Debilitating, that means that the things that you used to be able to do, you're not able to do anymore. Some things that you enjoyed, you just don't enjoy anymore. And the key word there is persistence as well. Anytime there is a loss of reality. We used to say, a person who believes themselves to be mentally ill is probably not mentally ill. That's not true. But the idea of the loss of reality, seeing things that no one else around you can see, hearing things that no one else around you hears, just that loss of contact is a sure sign that you need to see a professional. Any type of isolation, all of a sudden you don't like people, you don't want to be around other people, you want to disconnect. And you're not disconnecting in a pleasurable way, but it's causing you misery to disconnect, but you still want to do that. Those are signs of illness, severe depression, persistent depression. And depression in itself has its own set of symptoms. Anxiety, clinical anxiety has its own set of symptoms. And any substance abuse, increase in smoking and drinking and all other types of behavioral indices that go along with some of these disorders. So actually, it's not just being stressed. It's not just going through a funk. It's not just going through a period of sadness. It's not just being reactive because of some major events that are occurring. This is long-term, it's persistent, and nothing you can do about it changes it for you.
Wow. That's really helpful. Thank you for the detail. Thank you for the context of that. And yes, to help us all understand and putting this in our right mindset. So is this something that is mental illness something that should be diagnosed by a medical professional, or can we self-diagnose?
That's a great question in this world where information is so readily available to us. If we have a symptom, even we do this in the medical sphere of our lives. If we have a medical symptom, we will Google it. we'll see
Yep.
what these different symptoms may mean. And then we start the research and we scare ourselves to death because we don't know the particularities of the symptoms, right?
Right.
And so we may come up with 3 or 4 different diagnoses. Some of them may be fatal. And we panic enough that when you talk to someone else, say, just go to the doctor. So Dr. Shirley, just go to the doctor. And it's the same way with our symptoms, the kinds of things that I described. You can Google it. You can even take quizzes and tests. And the bottom line of each one of them, if it's done responsibly, is going to be talk to a professional. If you clicked on this inventory, it's because you are experiencing some pretty severe symptoms. Talk to a professional. Let a professional tell you as to whether or not you need kind of to go to the next step. One of the things that I know to be true in medical fields and in professional mental health fields is the idea of differential diagnosis is so vitally important. What I mean by differential diagnosis is I come in with symptoms of a fever and you know what seems to be a cold or flu, but they're going to give me a test for COVID because they want to make a differential diagnosis, which I treat flu very differently than I treat COVID. Right. It's the same thing with you come in with symptoms of sadness, maybe you're not sleeping or eating right. Yeah, I want to give you some, as a mental health professional, I want to give you some inventories. I want to give you a clinical interview and then make a differential diagnosis. I may say, this is reactive. It seems to be related to a grief that just happened in your life or a recent death or something. Or I may say, it sounds like you do have some underlying depression that we need to deal with. Yeah. And so you do want to make that differential diagnosis with a professional.
Gotcha. That's very, very helpful. How much of this, and obviously we'll get into a little bit of healthcare disparities and some of the stigma and even some of the socialization of various ethnic groups who aren't as willing to talk about it. We'll get there, but I'm wondering how much has societal norms, some of our societal values, and the fact that we are so polarized and divided even today, how much of that has contributed to mental illness?
It's an excellent question. I think more than any time before in our history, when 3 years ago, when everything kind of hit the fan with COVID-19 and we had so much racial disruption and protest and all, it seems like everything hit the surface at one time. It's a very stressful period for many people. It was the first time in a long, long time that I actually had clients who were just middle to high income folk working in corporate positions who were realizing for the first time that racism is a real issue, not just for America, but for themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And so those kind of issues came forward in the sense that we live in a society where the issue of racism is actually greatly debated for some, except for by those who are victims of racism. It becomes a stressor that contributes to mental illness in some cases. Right. So let me say another word about mental illness so that we can kind of understand how it works. It's a biological thing, it's a psychological thing, it's a social thing, and it is either made worse or better by the environmental or societal circumstances one finds him or herself. So if it's all of those things, then let's say I have a biological predisposition for depression. Let's say it runs in my family. But I'm living a good life. I'm living a balanced life. Mind, body, and spirit together. I'm enjoying work. I'm enjoying friends. I'm enjoying good mental health. And let's say the bottom falls out in my relationship, or I lose my job, or all of a sudden I'm under tremendous stress, the kind of stress that the stress for which I cannot bear the load. It just is not consistent with the way I'm put together. And that would push me into something that I'm already predisposed to, and say it's depression. So now I'm experiencing this clinical depression that I can't shake. Because remember, in this scenario, I'm already doing the things. I'm already jogging. I'm already doing some yoga. I'm already going to church every Sunday. I'm doing all of these things that keep me in balance. I'm enjoying friends. But all of a sudden, the stress is too much for my particular constitution to bear, and it expresses itself in clinical depression. I need to see a doctor. I need to explain that the stress that's involved. I need to actually do something about the stress, and I need to follow whatever the quote unquote prescription is in that case.
Yeah. Wow. That's all very interesting to think about too, because you think that you got it all under control and you got it all, you're eating right and you're sleeping right and you got good friends and you're working out and taking care of yourself, but something is still causing you a level of stress, right? And so that's where, when I like the words you said earlier, when it's persistent, when it becomes debilitating. I'm even hearing too, if it's something that's outside of the norm, particularly that's not necessarily been a part of your life before. Now, I know too that there are some people who may have mental illnesses at a very young age. Can you be born with mental illness, or is this something that is acquired?
Wow, that's an age kind of an age question, age-old question in psychology, right? So it's like, is it genetically predisposed, or is it nature, or is it nurture? Nature versus nurture. And my thought in the research shows that a small percent of people actually inherit some things and traits that predisposes them for either good health or illnesses. Just like you may say, well, diabetes runs in my family. So I'll use myself as an example. Diabetes runs in my family. I was shocked to be diagnosed because I take care of myself. I eat right, I'm underweight, all of these things that I thought was related. I turn away the sweet potato pie. I'll eat just a sliver. I know I'm talking to a foodie here, so.
You're talking to a foodie and a person with a sweet tooth, but I don't turn mine away yet, so.
And but that's my point. Even though I was doing the right things because it was biologically predisposed, I got diabetes. And just like diabetes is a disease where if I ignore it, it definitely is not going to go away. It's going to get worse. Your symptoms are going to get worse and worse. So if you—
Is that part of my mental health, or is that a mental illness?
That's mental illness. If ignored as a child, it's going to grow. That's my point. It's going to grow.
It's going to grow. Okay. So it's kind of like you said, that back and forth of, you may be predisposed to it. You may not necessarily be born into it, but it could be hereditary because it may run in your family in a gene that you're predisposed to as well.
And it also, it can run in your family in terms of a gene, but it also can be a part of how your family handles emotions that predisposes you, right? So, you have a family that loves to argue or loves to express themselves fully in many dramatic ways, then that is not going to be good for the emotional well-being of a person. And when I tell you that mental illness, part of the definition that I'm using is just the absence of that emotional well-being, then you understand that some of it is learned. So it's not just nature, it's also nurture. That's right. Right? And it's also within a context. So I like to give these examples. So when I think about the context, for example, of how mental illness shows up across race and culture and different ethnicities. I think about three things. So one is, just imagine this. A couple have stayed married for 60 years. One person in the couple dies. The other person begins to experience depression that they've never experienced in their life.
Right.
It's a part of the grief. It's a depression that's lasted. They can't kick it. And a part of coping strategy is that they tell you as a therapist, I've heard this, well, let's say it's the husband who has survived. The husband will say, my wife comes to visit me every night. So am I to take that as a sign of psychoticism or delusion? Or I'm hearing that this person's being visited by his wife. And you know, if I said, tell me more about it, they say, well, no, she comes into the room, she sits on the bed, and I would say, do you actually see her? No, I just know she's there. I know when she's present, and it's comforting. So what I do as a mental health professional in the diagnosis, I realized that by sheer numbers of hearing that kind of story, that is not an unusual perception to feel the presence of a loved one. It's not an unusual perception depending on culture. So I've got to put on my cultural hat, I got to put on my clinical hat, I've got to put on my spiritual hat. And so it's not as complicated as saying, well, this person is seeing things.
This person is delusional, yeah. Yeah,
this person is delusional. When I was, I'm still an instructor, but during my 30-year stint at USF, I would train graduate students. And one of the graduate students, this particular young woman was from Africa, and she said, Dr. Hall, let's be clear. There are some things that are clearly psychotic in our culture. She said, there is a tribe in my culture where if they slice a sweet potato, yam, and it bleeds, they believe that that sweet potato is the spirit of the ancestor. And I said, tell me more. And she's like, they say that they can slice a sweet potato and it bleeds real blood, and they know that they are tapping into the spirit of an ancestor. And there will be a curse on their lives unless they do something particular with the potato. And so they do all these rituals around that. Now tell me, isn't that psychotic? And I was like, it is so culturally specific. So one of the things that you said is it depends on the norm, right? It depends on what's going on around you. If everybody has the same belief about that potato, then it's not psychotic.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? Okay, I'm going to say this because of where we are in this day and age. So we're dealing now with a lot of hate in our society. We're dealing with a lot of racism in our society. And we know that there's a number of people who also believe that same thing as normal, right? It's normal to hate a certain group just simply because of their color or their background or ethnicity. Is that psychotic, or how do we explain that?
That is, it's hard to explain because it depends on who's asking the question. For those who would consider themselves to be consciously aware of what it means to be an anti-racist, to actually relate to people of other races, we understand that we not only accept, but we affirm the thoughts of others. So those that are not like us, we listen well and we hear and we try to understand and relate to the thoughts of others. So African Americans might view that as racism as a form of mental illness. And actually people have done research about racism as a form of mental illness. However, if that is the common way that you respond in your culture within that context, then it would be arguably not a mental illness. because it is so common in your context. So some things are not, while it might be appropriate to diagnose, it's not expedient.
Right. Gotcha. So we have this ill in our, in our society of, yes, racism, sexism, hetero, all of the, homophobia and all of the others. And that comes more from socialization, programming, and from our taught biases versus necessarily, assuming that it's a mental illness or that someone has, some kind of a mental health problem.
Right. And I think that those kind of cultural influences, those negative cultural influences can definitely impact already predisposed mental illness.
Yeah.
One,
Thank you.
one, one,
Good.
one thing that I want to make a quick relationship to, and I see people in the chat, and we want to respond to those questions as well, but I want to make this quick relationship between when I say we are a spirit, we live in a body, we have a soul, that all of these are connected, and we have disconnected them for many reasons that we may not go into now. But it seems that the idea of, I don't know if you've heard of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, things like presence of abuse in the home, someone in your family going to jail, someone in your family who's mentally ill, someone who abuses alcohol or drugs in your home. There are like 9 of these adverse childhood experiences that when people score above a score of 4 on those, you could almost predict that they will come to have later in life some physical conditions that are pretty serious, related to heart disease, related to stroke, etc. And so we look at that and think, wow, the things that actually happened to me as a child can show up in my body many, many years later. The body keeps the score. And there is a, if you haven't seen it, it's a TED Talk by this woman, Dr. Burke, that you should see on adverse childhood experiences. Because if you score 4 or more of those, then you ought to be paying very much attention, not only to your mental health, but also to your physical health. So they're very much related.
Gotcha. Good, good, good. Yeah, we do have a couple of those questions in the chat box as well. You may see one. One is, how do medical prescriptions, or how did medical prescriptions become so prevalent in handling and understanding and curing mental illness? And I guess my question to that too is one of the ones I was going to ask is it curable? Is mental illness something that can be cured? Someone says, do drugs do more harm than good? Yeah, we know that Oxycontin and some of those do worse than others. Or even I've heard of, what's the drug that is it Radisson? What's the Ritalin? Is that the one that was given, to some of the young children in, elementary school, given Ritalin that is supposed to be a behavioral modifier and settle them down if they're ADD. But my goodness, how do we handle this? All these prescriptions, I know it's a multi-billion-dollar business, and I'm wondering how much of this truly is about helping people with mental illness, or is it truly about just capitalizing on the ills of society?
Wow. So this, first of all, the mind, body, spirit connection, right? So when usually if you have clinical depression, there is something that is going on with the biochemistry in your brain. And that thing is the lack of a hormone called serotonin.
Serotonin. Okay.
So your levels of serotonin are low in your brain, and the medicine that helps with depression has serotonin in it. And so to compare that with diabetes, your body isn't using insulin as it should. So the cure for diabetes is to insert more insulin. But is that really the cure? The cure is then to change your lifestyle, to start exercising, to eat appropriately, etc., according to your own body. And so in the cases of some of the more severe mental illnesses, there are biological explanations for in some cases. And the experimenting with different drugs around those cases is how we get into the different medicines, etc. I am a psychologist. I don't use medicine in my practice, but if I have a severe and persistent case of depression or sometimes anxiety, I will refer to a psychiatrist or primary physician to start some low-level doses of medicine. I am not a person who is pro-medicine. I am pro get your lifestyle together first, and then let's see if you need medicine. But if it's in a case where someone is actively suicidal, if the person is actively psychotic, if there's an imminent danger to self or others, I need to calm that down immediately before someone gets hurt.
Wow.
And so that's the case of medicine. When I practice with parents and children, and I've been in the field for a long time, so I've seen lots and lots of things. When the parents are come in and for a child who has ADHD, and in our culture, in African American culture, we don't like medicine. So we will say, we don't want medicine. And so we understand that we don't want medicine. So here's the alternative to your medicine. You're going to have to be super parent. You're going to have to do consistent behavioral interventions. For example, you're going to have to structure that child's life so that you teach them to focus on one thing at a time. You're going to have to get that child out on that bicycle riding themselves until they can't, till they're exhausted and they can't do the running around at school the next day. You're going to have to wake them up early with rituals and routines. So you're going to do some super parenting. And unless you can commit to doing that, here's a little pill called Ritalin that will help this child settle down. So either you're going to help or you're going to agree to this medication if it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And I venture to say that unfortunately, there's too many parents that aren't willing to make that extreme commitment to be the super parents, to be present. I mean, even, showing up in school conferences with the teachers and to understand what's going on with their child. And yet, that's an easy way out. That's the quick fix, even though it takes more than just that. But that's where I think we have contributions and sometimes enabling of these mental illnesses because of the time commitment that it may take that some aren't willing to make.
Absolutely. And so the pill is the easiest way to solve or to resolve in people's mind. And sometimes with their guilt associated with not doing anything about it is resolved through a medical profession that is more highly esteemed in most cases than mental health professionals. And when I say highly esteemed, more confidence and trust placed in medical professionals to get the job done. Yeah. And as the parent of a child with a special need, I have a young son, as you know, Dr. Shirley, who has Down syndrome, to be present and show up in the classroom, in the lunchroom, and wherever rooms I need to be in with him to make sure, first of all, he's not labeled, he's not stigmatized, he's not mislabeled or stigmatized. That is, that was my persistent duty as Jeremy's mom.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of work. It does take a lot of work.
But you have been a phenomenal example of that super mom, that super parent who has been present, who has been there to, help with every aspect of his care. And, we need more of you like that. And that might help minimize some of the quick fixes of pills that ultimately doesn't have a long-term outcome. Let's talk about the workplace too. We've got some of our DEI professionals on, we got HR professionals on as well too. Let's talk about the workplace, because you've answered some of the other questions I had too about, what are some of the things that we can do if we're suffering with a mental illness? What can we do beyond just prescription drugs? And I heard just about, great support system, parenting would be great, but also making specific modifications in your own life and having a healthy lifestyle and making some certain choices. Those are all there. But when we talk about people with a mental illness, and like we said, more and more companies are talking about it. I'm so thrilled that they're leaning in and having these conversations. And we do a whole training program called Tips for Talking About Taboo Topics, right? That's intentionally the alliteration. But taboo topics includes people with disabilities, people with mental illness, mental health issues. And so wanted to get just a sense from you, how do you recommend and suggest that we support and really be able to talk about these kinds of issues in the workplace when traditionally, historically, we haven't talked about it, haven't been given permission to talk about it, and certainly haven't been given the skills to talk about it. Tell us what we can do to really start talking about this issue and minimize the stigma and the labeling.
I love the fact that you have the TIPS program. And I think if your employee is at a place, your employer is at a place where you're now in the workforce, where you're now talking about physical health, that's the easiest in.
Yeah.
That's the easiest entry to talk about mental health. I think we've got to stop separating them. I've had people who come in with persistent migraine headaches where the issue is a mental health issue, and it's not a physical issue. People who have mental health issues also come in with back pain, inability to sleep, eating disorders, all kind of excessive eating or excessive drinking. So these are things that we might consider physical health. It is not a stretch to cover if we are covering the topic of health in general. Mental health has to be a part of that in the workplace and with the workforce. We've got to invest in policies that support employees' well-being.
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
Invest in the policies that support well-being, self-care, stress management. Now,
yeah, I'm thinking that too.
I need to say a word about stress. Stress and anxiety are totally different things.
So they're not mental illnesses, or that's not, obviously it's about your mental health, but are they mental illnesses?
So stress is not a mental illness.
Okay.
Anxiety can be a mental illness if it's persistent and the extent of the anxiety, right? So the magnitude of the anxiety is a part of a mental illness. But stress has a reference, okay? There is something that is stressing you out that you can identify. That's what stress is. So I will name all the things that cause me stress, and that can lead to anxiety, but the stress itself is not the mental illness. Now, anxiety, you find yourself feeling symptoms that you don't have a referent to anymore. I just woke up panicking.
Wow.
You see the difference? And so that's anxiety. It's kind of this free-flowing stress that I can't even label why.
Yeah.
My heart is racing. My hands are sweating. I'm having a panic attack. So that's different. But stress management, stress can feed anxiety. So we want to keep our stress low.
Yeah.
Stress is negative for a negative indicator for all mental illnesses.
Wow.
Anything
mental and physical too, Doc, right? Because I'm hearing too that stress can really be one of those silent killers because it affects other organs in your body. It affects decision making. It affects so many other things.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm saying the best way to enter is through the physical realm that we already understand and appreciate.
Mhm.
Does it,
Okay.
not only does it affect your body, but it affects your mind. It is affect your emotions.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's part of the destigmatizing. Also, you know, there's some really, I don't know how much employee assessments that are going on, and if those assessments include a mental health section. That's something that can be done. As a
Let
part,
me stop right there. That's really good because a lot of us have been involved in employee engagement surveys. They do focus groups and that kind of thing. But I can tell you, having been in HR for 30 years, that's not something we've been comfortable asking about, right? We say if you have a mental illness or if you have a disability, you need to be the one to let us know. We make accommodations for you, based on ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I can tell you that it's not necessarily been commonplace for us to then, even include questions about a person's mental health. Now, I'm seeing it more and more now in focus groups and stuff, but even that, people are not willing to share it because they think it's going to come back and haunt them.
I think, you know how you wrote this book, Dr. Shirley, Reinvent Yourself?
Yes.
We've got to reinvent the workplace
Yep.
around mental health.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've got to insert some things there that have not been seen before, and then make it a practice of doing some things that have not been done. What if part of an employee's performance evaluation had something to do with what are you doing for your mental health?
That's good. Yeah.
What are you doing for self-care? What if that became a part of performance plans? So we may have healthier employees. Certainly, we would be reducing the stigma, inviting people to talk about it one-on-one, about, I haven't done this thing on my plan and I need to do it.
Yeah. I'm seeing more and more companies focusing on health and wellness programs is what they call it. So they'll have yoga internally. They've got fitness centers. If they're not on site, they give you, passes and discounts to it. I worked at a company where every Thursday they subsidize, massages and that kind of thing. You could go meditate, do meditation, everything. Now I'm seeing more companies doing mindfulness. I was doing, some of them have asked me when I open up to do training or keynotes, they're like, could you do a 7-minute mindfulness exercise? So they're starting to be more intentional about health and wellness. Doesn't necessarily mean that's about mental illness, right? Because now we know that the absence of your mental health is, potentially mental illness. So I think there's definitely some legs to that around HR. We have the opportunity to truly start influencing and offering more conversations around it, offering more opportunities to learn who has it, who's doing it, making a part of just the natural conversation of our performance reviews, our development plans. And then even as we, think about, moving into this new realm of hybrid work, that's also about how are you doing that even at home, not just in the office, because I may not be able to see you now. So I've got to be able to be more caring and do more outreach to hear how you're taking care of yourself.
I love I love to continue to stimulate your thinking in that area because I see another book coming. I see another opportunity for you, Dr. Shirley Davis, to help to enlighten the world about that particular balance that we need between physical, mental, and even spiritual health. Is all part of how we grow and how we maintain our wellness.
Yeah.
You also mentioned stigma.
Yeah.
Stigma is such a important thing to address, and it's so culturally determined. Different cultures handle mental illness differently. And a lot of BIPOC cultures, Black, Indigenous, people of color, will have different ways of stigmatizing. In our community, in the African American community, we see mental illness as almost as a sin, as a lack of faith. And so we conflate our spirituality with mental illness. And so the way that we envision a problem, the way we conceptualize the problem will dictate what we perceive as the right prescription. So if you see it as a spiritual issue, then the way that you treat it is through faith, more prayer, more faith, more prayer.
And you don't have
Instead of,
enough faith, and that's why you're like you are, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. Other cultures, for example, some Asian cultures experience mental illness as a terrible shame, an individual's failure or shame to the entire family.
Wow. Wow.
And so the idea of just do what you're supposed to do to honor this family, it's a lot of pressure to conform and to achieve
and even ignore those things, right?
and especially to ignore
Mhm.
and never ever to talk about it. Now, in most cultures, it's what goes on in this house stays in this house.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a cultural kind of mandate.
Yep.
And so certainly anything that might bring shame to the family or to the culture, to the race, you hear that kind of thing.
Mhm. But when it is so embedded in a culture like that, right? Ethnic culture, racial culture, even, as you think about, just other cultures around the world, how then do you undo that when it really is a part of their normal? How can we change the stigma? You mentioned the Asian culture, and yes, indigenous people have different ways of, Native Americans have different ways of dealing with mental illness as well. So there's stigma all the way around. It's just applied and manifested differently. How then do we change the way that we now talk about this? Black community, Asian community, indigenous community, everybody. How do we change the way we talk about it?
I love it because you're saying the answer in your question. The answer is talk about it. We got to talk about it. We got the thing that will reduce stigma is first education. What is mental health? What is mental illness? We're doing it right now. We're talking about it.
Yeah.
And if people on the, and we don't have time for that today, but if people would say, we didn't deal with mental health in my family. We couldn't even say that Uncle Johnny had some problem,
Yeah, while she's talking, those of you here in the chat, yeah, put that in there. Did you grow up being able to talk about this or not? Put it in the chat, yes or no. Did you talk about it? Go ahead, Dr. Hall.
Okay. And then, so the education around what it is and taking the mystery out of it, and then stop shaming people when they come forward. We got to get rid of the blame. Somebody has to be the blame, right? So who is responsible for you acting the way you're acting? It is either some kind of weakness in you or some type of punishment from God or whatever it is. We've got to stop blaming people and shaming people.
We have 100% of people so far. Everyone said, nope, we didn't talk about it. It was never a topic that came up. Absolutely could not, would not, should never talk about a mental illness. We better pray and be quiet. I mean, lots of no's, didn't grow up, wish we did. So you're right. This is our reality. And, it's going to take a huge paradigm shift, mindset shift, and a heart shift for us to be willing now to admit where we do have mental illness, admit how, it's impacting us, and be willing to talk about it.
I saw somebody said, we didn't do it, but now I do it with my children.
Yeah. And not even show emotions. You see that one?
Yes, no, so some cultures, it's not even cool to show emotions like sadness or anxiety. So you keep those things private.
That's right.
And guess what? When the stressors rise up, then if there's a mental illness, it's going to also increase suicidal thoughts, increase, etc. And so we just got to start talking, if not in our families, in the people that we have adopted as like family or close friends. We've got to have safe places where we can talk about it. We have to also promote this idea of mental health as health.
Yeah,
it's a part of health.
Yeah.
And so if you hear people talking about just your physical health, then bring up the fact that, your brain is a part of your body, and your brain controls your mental health.
Your body, right?
Right. And so can we just talk about what's going on in my brain for a second? Just a second.
That's right. Look,
Yes.
here's my last question. And there were some great questions that we've been able to answer today. I think there was one other one. I think we hit on it. So I don't know that we have to answer that one again. But the one of them was, is racism a mental illness? Which I asked that question as well. And is hatred? How do you even begin to differentiate between someone who chooses to be this way versus someone who feels they have no choice? So we did talk a bit about that nature, nurture, and that kind of thing. But I did want to ask you, Dr. Hall, this last question is, how can mental health professionals like yourself, I mean, you're taking on a lot. I know just from a life coach and a leadership coach, I take on a lot, even in my role in DE&I, and sometimes I internalize it, I personalize it, and it can be draining. It can be emotionally taxing. How do you as a mentor, or how can some of us who are helping to support those, how do we, with this mental health issue, how do you take care of yourself as a mental health professional and not allow it to debilitate you?
And thank you so much for that question. This is part of reducing the stigma. Forget physician, heal thyself. That's not going to work. So I have a close circle of friends. Guess my friends are mental health professionals. I didn't ask for it that way. It just happened that way. I grew up with people that I maintain friendships with. Or my friends tend to be people like you, people who have some insight or some coaching and all of that. And so the next step then is to find the friend that can hear my distress.
Yes.
And respond to that in an honest way without judgment.
Yeah.
So I find that friend who can hear me. I do the same thing for that friend. And in a non-judgmental way, hear that. If I need something beyond the friendship, that friend is also going to say, we've reached our limit. You need to go talk to somebody. Right. And then guess what? I need to go talk to somebody. But I should be the healthiest person in the world. I've got so many good friends who I can just pull my coat and say, and you know what they say, slow down, you're doing too much. Got to keep balanced. And regardless of how much I tell them I'm resting as well, they don't see me resting. They see me working. And they say,
people say the same thing. I was like, when do you sleep? And I do, trust me, y'all, I get some sleep. But the other part of it is, like you said, it's good friends. It's a great network. It's also having a great team around you who can help pick up some of the slack, who can help do some of the work for you as well. And look, here's the other thing about mental health and mental illness, right? And I love the distinction between the two, is that we all have a responsibility to take care of our mental health. I do mine also by just being in my happy place, right? My happy place, as y'all know, and all of y'all got my book on Living Beyond What If. I had to, first of all, get up beyond all my what ifs, those questions that stress me out, that caused me to walk outside of my purpose and my destiny, and that derailed me, and that really kept me, those self-imposed limitations. So that helps you with your mental health, is do what you love to do, get to your happy place. And it's also about walking in your purpose. And when you're doing those things that you're called and gifted and created to do, that will also help minimize the amount of stress and anxiety and depression. And then for me, it's also getting away and having that time where I disconnect, where I can de-stress, I can decompress, and have an opportunity to rest, relax, refresh, and get myself together and ready myself for my next assignment. So getting away is also very important.
I 100% agree. I think I shared with you my trip to Huatulco, Mexico recently.
I never heard of Huatulco.
That was a total surprise. Like somebody said, here's an opportunity. And I'm saying, I'm stressed. I need to take this. And it's just a choice. Do I stay here and work more, or do I get a timeout? And I needed a timeout and I took it. And so I'm blessed to be able to do that. But if you're not able to travel across the world or to the nearest beach, just find the nearest tree, the nearest park. Nearest park, the nearest garden. Get your balance in. Self-care is so critically important. Even if you're on the phone and you say, I have a mental illness and it's undisclosed, I haven't talked to anybody about it, try sharing it with a good friend who you know won't judge you,
That's
because the burden of carrying that by yourself is tremendous.
Yeah.
And take care of your mental health. Take care, whatever it takes, whatever it takes. There's some things I have, I said to you all, I have diabetes, whatever it takes. If it takes metformin, that's what I'm going to do. If it takes reducing what I eat, even though I'm not overweight, I'll do whatever it takes, because I want to live for a long, long time. And I want each of us to live for a very, very long time.
Can we give Dr. Hall a round of applause, a wonderful thank you, a heartfelt virtual hug, because this was very, very helpful. Yep, y'all can all come on now off of your cameras, and let's just thank her so much for an amazing amount of information to help all of us, but all of us to be able to help others as well too. I'm seeing cameras come on. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. This has been part 2 of our series for Mental Health Awareness Month, and truly I'm thankful that we're able to have these kinds of conversations. We're going to be sending you the link to it so you can share this with your companies, share this with your friends and your family members, because this was some wonderful information that all of us could use. And I'm going to be also sending you information, because I'm going to be doing one of those getaways, and I'm going to invite y'all to come join me and doing a mansion retreat where we can sit back, relax, and do some downloading, some resting, and then I'm going to help you work through your life plan, your exit strategies, and help you become the best version of yourself. Take care of your mental health and your mental well-being. Save the dates, March 1st through the 5th, but I'm going to send you information. Thanks again for being here. Someone said, invite me to the mentor. Yes, yes, yes. All right. We appreciate all of you. Thank you again for this information. And I look forward to seeing you in my very next one. We'll be announcing it. It will be coming up in June. Have a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the evening. And certainly we'll look forward to staying connected with you on social media. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thank you.